This is your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Got a fun show today. Got some fireworks in Chicago. They finally played. That was cool. Twins, White Sox got a game in despite early threats of rain. Thought maybe that would cause another cancellation, but no, they played. Twins lose 7-6. Josh Donaldson has some words for Lucas Giolito as he crosses home plate after a first-inning home run. Lucas Giolito has much stronger words for Josh Donaldson after the game. We'll get to that in a little bit. Also, a conversation with J.E. Skeets, No Dunks podcast, the starters before that. Longtime good guy in this business, blogging, podcasting. I've known him for quite some time. Great conversation with him about the NBA playoffs, about a Ben Simmons Timberwolves trade idea that he thinks is viable that I'm not so sure about, and more with him on just kind of his background and how he got started in this business. But first, what did I miss? Not surprising if you live in Minnesota and watched even a handful of Wild games. Maybe it was surprising to people in Dallas. But Kirill Kaprizov, Calder Trophy winner, 99 out of 100 first-place votes, a Gretzky of first-place votes. The only other one went to Jason Robertson from the Dallas Stars. If you thought that was a two-way race, it was not, and clearly it wasn't during the year. Every bit deserving of that award. First Wild player to win that award in franchise history. That goes back more than 20 years. So, a good first step for the Wild with Kaprizov. Had a excellent, great rookie season. Not surprising he wins the Calder. The bigger question now, can they get him signed soon and for what terms? I think it's a kind of a wide open checkbook when you talk about how instrumental he has been in their success right away, how much he changed that team dynamic almost from the minute he stepped on the ice this season. But it gets tricky because he's neither an unrestricted nor restricted free agent. He's got no real leverage, so it sounds like he's kind of trying to create a little bit of leverage by, there's this vague threat that he might go back to the KHL. Not a chance. I don't think that's going to happen, but he's trying to create whatever leverage he can to get the kind of deal he wants from the Wild with the terms and the length. I think the Wild would like to sign him to a long-term deal, even if that gets expensive, because that's the kind of player that's worth it. He's a young player. He's going to be in his prime for quite some time. He showed what he can do this season. Maybe he's only going to get even a little bit better than that as time goes on. You back up the truck and you give him as much money as he wants, whatever term he wants. I think Wild fans, their nerves would be calmed a little bit if that happened relatively quickly as opposed to dragging out further into this offseason. I don't have a doubt that it will get done at some point here. The question is it going to be long-term? Is it going to be a little bit of a shorter-term deal where he could then make even more money on a second contract once he's 28, 29, something like that? So we'll see. Can they get him signed for 8 years? I don't know. We'll see about that. But I think, like I said, Wild fans would do well to have that happen sooner rather than later to get their nerves calmed a little bit. And Kirill Kaprizov would do well to sign on that dotted line and get as much money as he can from the Wild because he has earned it.
I'm Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer at the Star Tribune and the first 5-time guest in daily delivery history. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast, our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, and even all of Rand's future blog posts about how the Timberwolves should trade for players they will never get, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to be joined on Daily Delivery today by J.E. Skeets. You probably know him from the No Dunks podcast. Maybe you know him from the starters. Before that, he's been on the internet for as long as the internet's been around, pretty much. He's one of my favorite guys that goes back this far. J.E. Skeets, how you doing, man?
What's up, Michael? How's it going, man? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. It's an exciting time. I want to get to a few different things, but I also want to let's talk at the beginning here. Let's talk origin stories, because just like looking back, the internet moves in a weird kind of pace, but you've been doing this for a long time. You were blogging in like the mid 2000s. You started podcasting a long time before it became cool to have before everybody else had a podcast. Like give me kind of how did you get this job, J.E. Skeets? How did you get to where you are right now?
I'll try and say it as quickly as possible here because we don't want this turning into a No Dunks podcast where it goes for 90 minutes plus.
No.
I went to school in Canada. I took radio and television, and that's where I met Tass, co-host of the show. That's where I met JD, still the producer of the show to this day. We also met Matty O, who was involved in the show, has moved on, but we all took radio and television, and obviously had a love for the medium. And then when school wrapped up, we we're like, well, what are we going to do now? You know, we had worked on some projects together, and this is by 2004, 2005, sort of around then. And JD actually was the first one to say, well, why don't we do something ourselves just to get some reps? Let's try a podcast. And even us being in school for radio and television, we're like, what are you talking about? What is that? And, you know, he basically explained it as like, well, it's sort of like radio, but it lives on the internet and people can put it on their devices. I mean, not even phones at this point, you know, like,
right?
like the iPods and stuff. So
you can store 4 podcasts on one device.
Yeah. And we said, okay, well, what are we going to talk about? And it was me and Tass sort of as the host of the show. And JD is like, talk about whatever you're passionate about. And Tass and I are big sports guys. So we were going to do just a general sports podcast. We're like, that seems a little too vague. Let's get a little more niche. All right. I like basketball. Tass, you like basketball. We're Raptors fans. So let's do that. And that was really in 2006 is when we started it. And we found a little bit of an immediate following, very small because no one knew what the heck a podcast was, but there was something there that people attached to. And then we turned it into a daily thing. And, you know, year after year after year, we sort of grew the show and started adding a video element to it. Eventually got hired to do it full time up in Canada. And that led us down to NBA TV. And now we're with The Athletic, but that's like 15 plus years ago. We've been doing some variation of the show. We've had different names, both the Basketball Jones and then the starters and now No Dunks, but at its core, it's the same show. It's a couple of buddies now because we've added some. We added an American and an Aussie. Shout out to Trey and Lee, and we just talk about hoops like you do with your friends. You know, at their place watching the game, at the bar, at the barbershop, wherever. So yeah, that's sort of. I tried to say that as quickly as possible. We just started doing it because it was a new thing, and we thought, why not? Let's get some reps in, but had really no idea where it would lead us to.
I love that idea about getting reps in because I, in addition to working at the Star Tribune, where I've been for quite a while, I do teach an adjunct class at the University of Minnesota, sports media. And that's what I tell students all the time. Like, if you're not exactly sure what you're going to do when you get out of school, even while you're in school, like just write a lot, do whatever's interesting to you, because you're going to get a lot of those. I wouldn't even say mistakes, but you're going to kind of figure out your voice. You're going to kind of figure out what you want to talk about, what you want to write about, things like that. And then by the time, maybe you garner a following that way, or maybe it's just, you kind of getting, your first 50 or 100 or 200, out of the way so that the next 200 are even better. I feel like it's absolutely critical. There's nothing quite like in sports media, the experience of actually doing it.
Oh, that's 100% true. We did the show for 4 years. And again, this turned into a daily show. So throughout the NBA season, that's a lot of shows. We did so many shows where we didn't get paid a penny, but when we finally saw our first paycheck for it, it was like, oh, we were sort of polished in the sense that we had just done 10,000 reps. Our chemistry was sort of already through the roof. Because that's the other thing when you're doing a show with other people and your own producer or director, like it's a dance, right? Like you trust each other a lot out there when, especially it's live. It's a bit of a lot of trust falls happening, guys picking you up, running with what you're talking about and all that. So yeah, to get that reps in, that's great advice. Like just do it. I mean, the worst thing that would ever going to happen is we were just going to have fun talking hoops and recording it and throwing it on the internet. It's like, okay, if nothing even came of it, well, at least we had a blast doing it. And fortunately for us, it did turn into a job, and that was even better.
What was it like when you found out that you could do this for a job?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So sort of it went hand in hand where I did start blogging as well. So I did a lot of writing. Now I'm the worst writer there is. I can barely talk. I don't know how I get paid to do that for a living, but I am just a horrible writer. I'm one of those people that I write a sentence and then I delete half of it and try and write the second half again. And like, I just get stuck in this little loop, but I'm bad. Anyway, I somehow got a blogging job way back in the day because along with the podcast, I was doing my own thing that got a little notice. I started working for Yahoo Sports, the Ball Don't Lie blog back in the day, did a little work for Deadspin. So I was like, doing that to sort of pay the bills a little bit. And then on the side, doing the podcast. Now they worked hand in hand because it was both about basketball. So that always worked. And wherever spot I was at too, I was always allowed to like, sort of like, well, here are my 10 NBA blog posts a day. Oh, can I also post that we are the Basketball Jones and here's an audio podcast for people? So, our employees were always great with that. We just started doing it again, just tried it. And it was awesome when finally someone was like, we want to pay you for your podcast. Like that was something special at the Score up in Canada. And then that turned into a television show, which led us on this whole other path. It was amazing. It was an incredible feeling, again, to put in 4 years of work. We always believed what we were doing, there was value in it, that we were getting better at it, that we were a different voice. Because nowadays, everybody's has a podcast. But at that time, it was like, well, unless you got 10 years experience playing in the NBA or you're a coach, no one cares what you think about the league.
Sure.
Why would you know anything? You're not an expert.
Never played the game. Did you even play the game?
Yeah, exactly. Do you even know how to dribble? I mean, can you even shoot? And it's like, well, yes, I can, not to the level of an NBA player, but I think people around that time started to figure out like, hold on, maybe there is a little like lane here for people that didn't play the game or coach the game, but are fans of it and love it, obviously. And the passion comes through on the podcast and can talk about it in an entertaining way, in an informative way and all that. So it was cool. And we eventually were like, wow, we can get paid to do this. And then we were off and running.
And I'm going to ask you to talk basketball, obviously, which is what you do all day, every day. But I'm interested in particular in the Western Conference playoffs right now. And that's, every time I watch, I feel like the West is the varsity, the East is the junior varsity. And that is not Raptors slander in any way. It's just the way I've felt about the playoffs so far this year. I just felt like the West has been more interesting and more entertaining basketball. I mean, they've been compelling series across the board. Just I feel like the West, the games have been the quality of play has been better. And the Suns Clippers series, I can't figure it out. Every time I think it's going one way, it goes another way, and that was exemplified again with Game 5. I thought the Clippers were dead, and then all of a sudden they're very much not dead. What have you? Let's start from a global perspective. What have you liked in these playoffs so far, and what's kind of what are themes that you think have emerged? Big picture so far in the playoffs this year.
Well, yeah, there's sort of three things that have stuck out with this playoff run for all these teams. One, a lot of the games have been close. It feels like, I don't know why, if that's just selective memory, but it does feel like in postseason past, there are a lot of blowouts, like games that just turn into like 20, 25 point snoozers. And we've had some of those, but it feels like more times than not, we've had some close games. Maybe that's just the everybody being able to hit the three ball and you get back in these games quickly. I don't know what it is, but I like that. The other thing is like this sort of coming out party for a lot of these young stars that like sickos like us might be watching on League Pass, but the casual fan doesn't get to see as often, like your Trae Youngs and your Devin Bookers and stuff like that. Always love when a player like that, who, again, if you're watching them on a nightly basis or you're tuning into a lot of their games on League Pass, you're like, wow, these guys are really good. And yeah, some of those guys are like all-stars and stuff like that, but like taking their game to the next level and people like appreciating it and going, wow, this is pretty special. So that's cool. And there was a third part. Oh, it's like not being able to predict who is going to win it. You said it, yeah. Michael. It's like, I swear we do this every year, of course, with our show where we make our predictions like everybody does, like, oh, Suns in blank many games or Hawks in blank many games. Like we make our predictions for every series more times than not. I mean, I think we're decent at it. Like we nail a lot of them. And this has been the worst when it comes to predictions, not only from a series basis, but from like a game-to-game basis. Like you said, most people thought the Clippers were dead in the water in Game 5. It's back in Phoenix. Chris Paul's finally going to get over the hump, go to the finals. And like, yeah, they come out, the Clippers do 20-5 run. Paul George has, I think, the best game of his career. Yeah. It's at least on his top 3 list. And suddenly they're in it. And this is without Kawhi, and it was even without Zubats there, the starting center. They go small. So, I mean, that's made it for an enjoyable playoff watch. I know, for me at least, like, trying to make a prediction on our show and then like just having it blow up in your face, it's actually sort of exciting.
Neither of my finalists even made the conference finals. I had Nets, Utah, right. which I felt like Utah was even stepping out on the limb. And then they, I can't believe they can't close out the Clippers when Kawhi goes down. And yet they can't. And, here we are with, Suns, Clippers, Hawks, Bucks. And I guess you would, Clippers and Bucks being in the mix isn't shocking from the start of the playoffs, but even the Suns as a 2 seed and the Hawks, like who had the Hawks in the conference finals? Nobody.
Yeah,
Nobody.
no, nobody. And so, I mean, yeah, it's going to be crazy no matter who goes through from either of these finals here, the East and West. Like any matchup you want to come up with is just going to look weird and be a little strange to wrap your head around. Like, oh, it's Suns versus Bucks, or it's Hawks versus Clippers, whatever it ends up being. It's just weird, but I like it. It's refreshing. And, you know, I think there's something to like a dynasty team, a Warriors team. I think that is good for the league. I think people then turn on them and they want them to lose and all that. But this is also fun. The injuries have sucked. That's the one thing that sucks.
Yeah.
But in a strange way, it almost feels like every team has been hurt by a somewhat significant injury, like at least a lot of them. And so it's like sort of a level playing field in that weird sense. But I'm loving the games still. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to a little bit of Timberwolves stuff for you, especially Ben Simmons, which, ties into your Raptors a little bit if we talk about trade possibilities even. But as we think about the Trae Young, Luka Doncic trade from, they're going to be tied together forever. It feels like the narrative has to change a little bit from these playoffs. The Trae Young, I get that Atlanta probably has a more well-rounded team than Dallas does, that they've done a better job of surrounding him with the right kind of guys. But if Luka looked like Dallas was the runaway winner, or at least, that both guys were really good, but that Luka had the chance to be this all-time special player, has that conversation changed? Do you feel like because of what Trae Young has done in the postseason and what Atlanta looks like and getting to the conference finals with him?
Yeah, I don't think there's no doubt it has changed, because I actually said on the show not too long ago, it's like, I'm done hearing that. Like, they're going to be forever linked for sure. Yes. That's fine. Magic and Bird are forever linked. That's okay. That happens, with players. But I'm done hearing like who won the trade, all the Mavs, hosed them and all that. It's like, no, they didn't. Both of these organizations, I assume, are pretty happy with their players. They both look like legit superstars in this league. Would you still bank on Luka winning an MVP over Trae Young? Yeah, probably. But look at what Trae's doing on the biggest stage, on the road, in some of the most hostile environments, be it New York or Philly, Milwaukee, not as hostile as those others too, but they seem nice people up there. But
Midwest
it's amazing.
Environment is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. They seem very kind. They seem very Canadian-like, if I'm being honest. So I just don't. I almost don't want to hear it anymore. And then there is like, okay, who knows what even Cam Reddish turns into? There was another pick involved there, but it's like they're both happy. Everybody's happy except maybe the Kings, because even the Suns with Ayton at number one are loving it right now if they go to the final. So I'm done with it. And then I know we're going to spin to Ben Simmons here, because I also said I don't want to see any more footage of Ben Simmons hitting jumpers or 3-pointers during the summer. No. None. Don't ever show them to me. Don't tag me in them. I don't care. Until we ever see it in an NBA game, I don't care. I don't care if he does it in practice or in the summer. So anytime
that gets tweeted out, just reply 24 for 71. That was his free throws in the playoffs this year. 24 for 71. Are you kidding me? But that said, he's fascinating. He's the most intriguing, trade possibility, because he does everything else well, except for the thing that, you kind of feel like you absolutely have to have in the last 6 minutes of a game. So what do you do about that? Who wants him? Where does he make sense? The Timberwolves obviously are here in Minnesota. That's the team I talk about, by far and away the most here. I don't really know if they have even the pieces to try to get a Ben Simmons, based on especially not getting that top 3 pick. But that said, like, if you're another team, how much do you want Ben Simmons, and where does he make sense? Like, what kind of team can he go to where all of a sudden he not just gets you to the playoffs, but you can work with his deficiencies enough that he can be a championship level player? Because it doesn't feel like it's happening with Joel Embiid in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% convinced he is traded, because I think they've tried it enough, and the experiment does not work with those two guys as their star players, and then Tobias in the mix too. It's a tough question to answer. Like, yeah, can people get more out of Ben Simmons? I mean, it's ultimately going to come down to him. Like, what we're talking about is practice, like especially with free throws. I mean, of all things, that you can work on, and he should get better at that. Will he ever add a reliable jumper, a 3-pointer? It feels less and less likely. But that, again, like you said, he does all these other things so well at an elite status. that so many teams, I think, would talk themselves into wanting to trade for them. I threw out one that I like. I love him on the Wolves personally.
Okay.
That seems like a team that Ben Simmons right now was sort of like his psyche a little hurting, I'm sure. His ego may be a little bruised. I think going, and I don't mean this as a knock against the Minnesota Timberwolves, but going to an organization like that right now, that's still pretty low in the pecking order, and maybe gets overlooked a little bit by some of the other big markets in the league. That to me seems perfect. And him with Cat also I like. One, of course, being a defensive-minded guy, the other being super offensively talented in Cat. I think there is a trade there. I've thrown it out on Twitter. If it's Ben Simmons and George Hill, let's say, to make the money work, for a D'Angelo Russell as the key piece.
Yeah.
And then I threw Beasley in.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of Wolves fans were like, whoa, he's really good. And he is. I mean, this guy was like flirting as a 20-point-per-game scorer. But that, to me, feels like a somewhat realistic trade.
That's enough for you? I can't decide if that's enough. If Philadelphia looks at it and says, we can do better than that.
Yeah, maybe. And that's why I'm throwing Beasley in there, because I've seen some people saying, D'Angelo Russell, Jake Layman, and a pick and stuff like that. It's like, I could see the Philadelphia 76ers, like more especially like, okay, we're moving off of Ben Simmons. We want a guard that can score and can hit a three in the final couple of minutes. And D'Angelo Russell's got confidence. Yeah. It's absolutely him. And then, we can add like another sort of like piece. We need another player that can come up, and Beasley's good. I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star, but I think he's a really good player. That one, you're right. Maybe it's not enough for Philly, but his trade value right now, Ben Simmons, is, it's never been lower.
I would, if that was a viable option, I would absolutely do that if I was the Timberwolves. And I don't know if I would do that if I'm Philadelphia, because I don't know if you're getting the requisite, if you're getting enough value. If you think you can get a CJ McCollum, I think that's a better play than than something the Wolves could offer, especially, like I said, after they didn't get to keep their pick this year. But he would make a ton of sense here. They need to fix the defense. They've already got Edwards. They've already got Karl Anthony Towns to score the ball. That's not really what they need in the starting five. It's not like Ben Simmons can't score either. He can score in transition. He can do all these other things. It's, can you hide him enough? And the worry I have about him is his numbers from year to year. They haven't really gotten better. The free throws are the same. The shooting is the same. It's kind of like he's almost the same guy that he came into the league as, 4 or 5 years ago. And does that, does that piece of it, the fact that he hasn't really added to his game, should that be kind of a red flag for where the next 5 years of his career will go?
Yeah, that's true. And I think when you get to that, it's like, is that him as a person? And that will never change, because he was like the number one pick with not having a polished offensive game, because he's just, such an athletic freak and could get by on that. And, obviously when he was younger, and then even in college there at LSU, and even that didn't impress a lot of people, but he was still rewarded with the number one pick and all that. Or him going, can another organization and the players that he's surrounded with, like new players, get it out of him, bring it out of him, and, really get him to focus on working on his game and getting better at some of the things that are his limitations. That's fascinating. That's why it's like, it can't be Philly. It's not going to be Philly. They know it. He knows it. And, hopefully for Philadelphia, they're getting a lot of these teams calling, like Minnesota, like the Blazers with CJ. Is there a Bulls one with Zach LaVine? I think that's less likely. There's tons. I mean, I threw it on Twitter. I almost got a trade offer, like somewhat realistic. A lot of people are pretty good at this now, from like 20 teams, like throwing at deals for a potential Ben Simmons. So I would assume Daryl Morey is getting, maybe 10 of those teams calling him in real life and saying, hey, what would it take? So I think he's gone, and I like him in Minnesota. I think it is a nice fit. And, it's nice to hear that you, as an expert of the team, think the Wolves would do D'Angelo Russell and Beasley, but maybe Philly wouldn't do that. That's fair. I'm trying, just
can't decide if not getting that pick was kind of the death blow in the Ben Simmons sweepstakes, or if, those two guys and maybe a future pick, or if it's just those two guys, if that ends up being enough value, if whatever Philadelphia thinks of D'Angelo Russell, because I do think he'd be a good fit with Embiid. It's just, do you have enough defense then? Because you're giving up quite a bit on that end if you do make that you do make that swap. Last thing for you, how are your Raptors going to do? What's the next step for them? Are you just coasting on fumes for the next 5-10 years off of that championship, or is there a quick resurgence because you just wipe this year away and say, weird year, you played in Tampa, what are you going to do next?
Well, that's exactly what I'm doing. And yes, I'm also, riding the high still of the 2019 title. That'll last me for a couple more years. Right now, there's a lot of trade talk around Siakam, which is a little worrisome to me. I don't buy this Warriors one, like a Wiseman and a pick for him. That does not feel like enough. Like
you're taking Wiggins in that trade too, because that's the salary.
Yeah, that's right, to make the money work. So that I do not think is happening. And I think the Raptors as an organization, just like you said, is like, okay, throw that year out the window. Like, look where we were. We're not playing in front of, not that everybody was playing in front of fans, but we're not even in our own country and have the familiarity of that. We're in Tampa, for crying out loud. So let's reset and see what we have, because they have a good team still in Van Vliet and OG, and Siakam is there. Now they got the number 4 pick. I did enjoy that, jumping up there in the draft lottery a little bit. That's nice. Do we end up with one of the Jalen's? Does Mobley fall to 4? We'll see. It could be worse for sure, having that number 4 pick. I still think they're going to be a really good team, actually. I think when they're back in Toronto and we are back to normal here, I think they're a playoff team. I don't think they're contending for a title, but he ain't going anywhere, Siakam, and I'll be watching and cheering them on. I just hope we keep Masai Ujiri. That's the biggest question mark that for some reason has not being talked about enough. They have not signed on the dotted line to keep what I think is the best GM in the league there. So hopefully that happens soon.
J.E. Skeets, wonderful to catch up with you. Great stuff on the No Dunks podcast. When you're not listening to Daily Delivery, you should definitely be listening to that every day. You guys do like over an hour every day. That's like twice as much as I do. I feel like I'm slacking when I compare myself to you guys. So congrats on everything, and we'll catch up again down the road. All right.
Thanks a lot, man.
Postscript to that conversation I had with J.E. Skeets. We did that on Tuesday afternoon. We talked about how the wild these playoffs have been. Nothing more surprising, than Trae Young being ruled out of Game 4 on Tuesday night for the Hawks. Looked like I thought they were going to be dead in the water when I saw that he was ruled out. Instead, the Hawks blow out the Bucks. So that's another piece of this, just so surprising this postseason. Like J.E. Skeets and I talked about, you can't really predict what's going to happen next in these playoffs. That series now 2-2. We'll see what the availability of Trae Young is going forward in this series. He had that bone bruise on his foot after getting injured in Game 3, but the Hawks didn't need him in Game 4. A masterful game plan, got great defense, and now that series is all tied 2-2, going back to Milwaukee for Game 5 on Thursday. I alluded to this at the get-go. Let's make this a long, deep cooler. A lot of stuff in that cooler, a lot of ice. Fish around in there to get all you want, because Josh Donaldson versus Lucas Giolito. It feels like Josh Donaldson versus the whole league is going on right now, especially since he started getting himself right in the middle of the sticky substance controversy. He hits a home run in the first inning of the Twins game at Chicago, gives the Twins an early lead. Appears like he says something like not sticky anymore as he crosses home plate, goes to the Twins dugout. File that away for later. Lucas Giolito, who gave up the home run, was not happy about that later. He settled down, ended up having a pretty good outing. I think 6 innings, 3 runs. Kenta Maeda for the Twins did not have a good outing. In fact, had a very poor outing. Another in a string of disappointing starts for the Twins. At the beginning of the season, it sure looked like the bullpen was going to be the most disappointing facet of this year's team. And maybe at the end of the day, that ends up being the thing that really derailed the season. But my goodness, the starting pitching has been atrocious. 25th in the majors in ERA now. That number for starters hovering near 5. And I get it, they've had some injuries lately, but that was not the problem at the start of the year. The problem at the start of the year was just ineffectiveness and a lot of guys not pitching as well as they could, not as well as they thought they would at the start of the year, and Kenta Maeda is at the top of that list. He gave up 7 runs, all 7 runs in that 7-6 loss. If he gives them a good start, they might win that game and might get them propelled in a different direction. Instead, it's a 7-6 loss at a time where the Twins can't afford any losses to Chicago. Now, that was only the plot. The subplot was much more interesting because after the game, Lucas Giolito had some things to say about Josh Donaldson. I'm not going to play them because this is a polite family podcast. We don't swear on this podcast. Sometimes I wish we could. It'd be kind of fun. But Lucas Giolito's comments after the game basically said he called Donaldson a pest, kind of the classless move, and said... Giolito saying, "Don't go across home plate and do all that. Just come to me." Adding later, "We won. The W's next to my name. They're in last place." Wow. Shots fired, but you know what? Probably had it coming with when you cross home plate and say that, and you end up losing and you're not having a great season. So Josh Donaldson not available after the game. Maybe we'll hear from him on Wednesday. So the latest chapter of that still to unfold, and maybe I don't know what Lucas Giolito, where he falls in the sticky substance spectrum. Josh Donaldson clearly has his theories on all that, but this series is only heating up, and this would even be a lot more fun if these two teams were battling for first place and not at opposite ends of the AL Central standings. That'll do it for me today. Good show coming up on Thursday. I think I'll have Jerry Zagota talking Minnesota United, and I'll have Lavelle E. Neal III on Friday's show. He's been in Chicago covering this Twins-White Sox series. I'll get his perspectives after that whole thing is done. Thanks for joining me here today. We'll catch you again on Thursday.